Dodge this.
I don't like your tone. I'm not gonna be talking to you anymore, is what she said to try to kill the deal.
That's what she said.
So I've been shooting a bunch of videos on how listing agents try to kill deals or how realtors try to kill deals. And this one was probably one of the worst. I was working with a client last year and we were shopping for his first home and we were looking at different properties and then we found this property. And this property was an assignment for sale. If you aren't familiar with an assignment for sale, assignment is basically when a buyer buys a pre-sale, let's say it completes in 4 years time, and you have this contract now. And let's say the property has gone up like 100,000 or 200,000 in that 4-year period, and you want to sell that contract to a second buyer. And the second buyer is going to buy this assignment. Basically, the seller or the first buyer is assigning this contract to the second buyer and taking a profit for it. So I was working with my client, so we are buying this assignment on this pre-sale. And there were 2 listing agents. And the listing agent I was in contact with was a younger lady and she was just being very difficult. So first of all, we wanted to get a copy of the pre-sale contract because what happens is when you are selling an assignment, the buyer, the second buyer is buying the contract. And it's important for the second buyer to look at the contract that the first buyer had with the developer and seeing if that's what the second buyer wants to buy. So the second buyer is going, I want to buy your assignment, which is buying your contract. Let me see what it says so I know I'm buying the right thing. The listing agent was saying, no, my client doesn't want to show the contract. That's only available after we get an accepted offer. And that is an incredibly rare instance. How does buyer number 2, which is my client, know what to offer on this property if he doesn't know what he is buying? So let's say the property is 700,000, but there are specific terms and conditions that's not favorable to my buyer. He has no clue because he's not allowed to see the contract that the first buyer has with the developer until he has an accepted offer. So how does the buyer number 2 negotiate with buyer number 1 if he doesn't know exactly what he's buying? In that instance, as a buyer agent, I'm going to be working in the best interest of my client, buyer number 2. I will be saying to listing agent, hey, my client doesn't know what they're buying. So we have no choice but to write a super low offer because we don't know what we're buying. So then if we write a super low offer, your client's likely not going to accept it, and therefore we are not going to get to an accepted offer. So why don't you send us a copy of the contract so that my client knows what they are buying? She was like, no, my client is very private and doesn't really reveal her information. But that's how real estate works. In order for buyer number 2 to buy the buyer number 1's contract, the buyer number 2 needs to see what the contract says. And I was explaining this over and over again, but she wasn't getting it. And I said, even if my client does write a high offer, and then your client accepts it, but then there's a subject clause that says subject to reviewing the contract. And my client sees the contract and says, these terms aren't what I agreed to, so I'm not gonna remove subjects. It's gonna waste a bunch of time for everyone. So I said to the listing agent, why don't you just send me the buyer number 1's contract so my buyer number 2 can decide whether they want to write an offer on this contract or not. And she was like, no, you're like revealing the seller's information is private. I understand. But I said, you need to communicate to your client that this is very standard buying practice for an assignment. And she got really defensive and she was trying to ask a bunch of questions about my client. Are they serious? Are they pre-approved? And all that. I'm like, yes, they are serious. They are pre-approved. They're ready to buy. And she was like, well, my client doesn't want to reveal his or her personal information. I'm like, I get it, but you have to educate your client that that's not standard practice in this real estate transaction. Very typical real estate transaction. She was like, no, 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 and making it very difficult. And I said, you have to educate your client. And she got really defensive, especially when I said, you gotta manage the expectations of your client. You know, I know they want to keep their personal information confidential, but how do you expect to buy or sell real estate when the other party doesn't know what they're buying? Especially the contract. That's specifically what they're buying, because it's an assignment, which is a pre-sale, which has not been built. So my client doesn't know what they are buying at all. But this listing agent went ballistic on me. She was like, don't talk to me like that. I'm managing my client's expectations really well. My client has the right to keep her information confidential. I'm like, I get it, but we can't do a deal. My client wants to buy the assignment, but is not getting through to you. You have to convince your client to allow the contract to be sent to my buyer so they can know what they are about to buy or what they are about to offer on. And she's like, I don't like the tone of your voice. This conversation is ending. And she hung up on me. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is how you kill deals. And I was like, and my client was a first-time home buyer, so I had to frame it well so that he doesn't get all pissed off and walk away. Because I know this property was good and he liked it. So what I ended up doing was I spoke to the other realtor that was part of the listing. There were 2 realtors, 2 listing agents. So I think the other realtor was like the team leader or something like that. And I spoke with him and I explained the situation. And he was like, oh, okay, no worries, let me talk to her and I'll sort it out. So we ended up on getting the listing agent to cover up the personal names and send the contract over so my client could see what they are buying. Look at the contract, look at the terms and conditions, look at the price that they're buying and all that stuff, the deposit structure, etc. It was an incredibly sensitive time because the second listing agent was very emotional and just pissed off. She said I was raising my voice, but I was just passionately diplomatic about the situation. It's very common for a buyer, super common for a buyer buying an assignment. I'm buying your contract, so let me look at the contract that I'm about to buy. And she was just being difficult. In the end, we got the seller's information, covered up, and it was sent to my buyer, and my buyer wrote an offer and we got it accepted, and my client bought the place. But I'm thinking, wow, how do you prevent this in the future? In this situation, you can prevent this. What you do is you have the buyer sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, saying that the information he or she sees will not be disclosed anywhere else, or they could be subject to litigation, etc. That should give the seller some peace of mind, saying that don't worry, your information is confidential, it's not going to be used against you, etc. An NDA is what is used in a lot of commercial deals and for people who are sensitive about their personal information or the financials being shared with other people. So an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, is a good way to bypass this kind of problem in the future. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a comment below if you've ever experienced this kind of situation. And hey, subscribe. Comment below. I love to hear your stories, your feedback, and if you like to hear more of these kind of stories, comment in the comment section below. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I will see you in the next video.